Thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm Alan Altschiller. I'm the academic dean of the Kennedy School, and I'll be the moderator tonight. I think one doesn't have to tell this audience that in this most pluralistic of societies, at least most pluralistic of those that are not at war with one another, a central question is the circumstances in which discrimination is legally and morally permissible. And probably the frontier of debate around that issue today is the issue of discrimination and the rights of gays. And that's the subject of our discussion this evening. We've just had two referendums in the most recent election in Colorado and Oregon with respect to, in the case of Colorado, the permissibility under the state constitution of gay rights laws at the local level. In Oregon, a proposal for a specific constitutional amendment that would have legitimized discrimination on the basis of sexual preference. The Oregon referendum, as you know, passed. The Oregon referendum or ballot proposition did not. Our discussion today will take place with a panel that is not united on this subject. It should be fun. We've asked them to spend about 7 minutes in each of their initial presentations, and then we hope to have a very interactive session. Let me just say spend a moment introducing all four of the panelists, and then we've agreed we'll go in alphabetical order. And I won't say another word until they're finished, except I may pass a note down if anybody gets carried away and speaks too long. John Bennett, immediately to my left, is the mayor of Aspen, Colorado. He is the founder and the president of Pour la France Incorporated, 6 restaurants in Colorado. And he's the chairman of the board of High Mountain Transportation Incorporated, which is a taxi company, and I guess has a variety of other businesses in the Aspen area as well. But he's with us today in his political role as the mayor. He is the one who came furthest, and we were trying to figure out why he had flown from so far. We heard that he heard that the skiing was better in New England this year than in Colorado, so he decided to come out and check it out. David Locke, to his left, has been a familiar figure for many years on the Massachusetts political scene. He's a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. He was elected to the Massachusetts legislature first in 1960. In 1968, he was elected to the Massachusetts Senate, where he served for the next 20 years, and he was the Assistant Republican floor leader for 18 years, and for the last 4 years he was the Republican floor leader in the Massachusetts Senate. He is in the general practice of law today in the firm of Locke, Fullerton, and Lundwall, which is the successor to a firm that he founded in 1955. He's had a variety of honors, as you can imagine, over the course of his career, but let me just note one. He received the award of the legislator of the year by the National Republican Legislators Association, one of 3,000 legislators in the country in that year, and he was the one selected. Tim McFeely is the executive director of the Human Rights Campaign Fund, the largest lesbian and gay political organization in the country, and one of the top 50 PACs in the United States. Infamous in most circumstances, but perhaps not in all. Prior to his directorship, which began in 1989, Tim practiced law in Boston and was active in political and civic affairs here. He's a graduate of Princeton and of the Harvard Law School. And finally, David Skondres is a Boston city councilor. He was first elected in 1983, and he's been re-elected continuously since. He's from Ward 4 in Boston. He's a graduate of Harvard with a BA, has an MA in economics from Northeastern. He's a former instructor in mathematics at Northeastern. He was co-founder of the Fenway Community Health Center and a variety of other groups here in Boston. I think that's enough for me. Let me turn to Mayor Bennett.
Thank you. I was asked to say a few words about Amendment 2 from Aspen's perspective. And I want to begin by saying that our perspective is not that of the rest of our state. I wish that it were. The city of Aspen voted against Amendment 2 by a margin of over 3-1, so we made our feelings pretty clear. The city council, after Amendment I said Amendment 1. We did have a fight over Amendment 1 as well. Amendment 2, excuse me. We weren't fond of either one of them, so forgive me if I sometimes switch them in my memory. After Amendment 2 was passed, the City Council unanimously passed a series of resolutions condemning it, asking our city attorney to initiate legislation seeking to overturn it, and furthermore instructing our city attorney's office and our police department to continue enforcing our existing ordinance, which I'll talk a little about. So our perspective was we had very strong feelings about Amendment 2, and unfortunately, from our point of view, they were not shared by the rest of the state, because obviously the rest of the state did pass it. I would like to very briefly kind of give you the reasons that we have for our stand on the issue. They basically break into two areas, what I will call the philosophical, ethical areas, and the legal areas. And as some of us may comment, they are not necessarily the same, those two. Aspen has, we like to think, a very long and rich tradition of respect for human rights. Since the founding of the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies in the late 1940s, the town has been host to a great many world leaders and Supreme Court justices and Harvard Business School deans, as I learned in a conversation a moment ago.
I'm sure Kennedy School deans get there from time to time, too.
Yes, yes. We like to think, and we are very proud of, what we think is a tradition of respect for constitutional rights and human rights and civil rights. We like to think that we have a free, somewhat enlightened, open society, and we're very proud to have the oldest comprehensive civil rights ordinance in the state of Colorado. Ours is 16 years old, and it, in 1977, made it illegal in the city of Aspen to discriminate on the basis of, and I'm going to cheat and refer to my notes because I can never get all these, there are 14 if you want to count them: race, religion, color, creed, ancestry, national origin, sex, age, marital status, physical handicap, sexual orientation, family responsibility, or political affiliation. And that's important because this was not a gay rights ordinance. It happened to cover gay rights, and we believe strongly in protecting gay rights, but this was not aimed specifically at protecting just gays. Had we been able to identify other minority groups that we thought warranted protection, we would certainly have included them, and we may well include new ones as they come around in the future. The point of Amendment 2 is that it essentially took away it took one group out of this 14, and it said this one group you may not protect. This one group it is all right to discriminate against. And this is the transition into our legal problem with Amendment 2. The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and I want to, in the interest of full disclosure, say I am not an attorney and I've never studied law, so there are probably people in the room who know far, far more about this issue than I, and I will defer to them later. But my understanding of the 14th Amendment is that it does a couple of things. It says that the state cannot deny equal protection under the laws, and it also says that all persons similarly situated are to be treated alike by the government. Our feeling and our argument in the case that we took to the district court in Denver, where so far we are winning, our argument was that this is clearly a case where people are not getting that equal protection. We had 14 groups protected in our civil rights ordinance, and now we have 13. Amendment 2 basically reached into the little group of 14 and plucked one out and said, this one group, it is okay to discriminate against. And that didn't seem fair to us from an ethical, moral point of view, and it doesn't seem legal to us from a constitutional point of view. And I'm happy to say that so far the district judge in Denver has agreed. He gave us the injunction that we and the cities of Boulder and Denver and about 7 or 8 individuals, we were all co-plaintiffs in a lawsuit, and so far we are winning that. We've won an injunction. We expect to continue winning as it winds its way through the courts. The judge said essentially that he agreed with our 14th Amendment interpretation. He also said that he saw in this case a fundamental right of citizens of Colorado that was being taken away, and that was the fundamental right, in his words, not to have the state endorse and give effect to private biases. not to, as he also said, give state approval to private discrimination, which is essentially what, in our view, Amendment 2 does. It says that it is okay for people not only to have biases and prejudices, but to act upon them. And in our court case, we cited a couple of Supreme Court decisions that made it very clear that that the purpose of government and the purpose of the court system was not to allow government to endorse or support private bias and private discrimination. That the government may not be able to do away with or forbid or wipe the slate clean of private discrimination, but it certainly cannot and must not support it, endorse it, or in any way further it. And in the judge's view and the judge's decision, that's exactly what was going on. I will end here with a final comment that the supporters of Amendment 2 really got it through the ballot and got it approved by arguing very forcefully that what was going on was an attempt by a sort of privileged minority to create special rights for itself, special rights that no one else had. And the reason, in my view, and the view of a lot of people in Colorado, that this passed the ballot was not that Colorado is a hate state or filled with people who really are gay bashers or you know, extraordinarily intolerant, but rather that the language in the ballot was exceedingly misleading. The headline was "No Special Protection." And if you walked into the ballot and you read this, and you read the language, you kind of tended, if you weren't educated on the issue, you tended to walk away with a feeling that it's a small minority group out to get quotas for themselves, out to get themselves declared a very special protected class with all kinds of special rights that the rest of us don't have. And those of us who opposed and still oppose Amendment 2 are trying to get the message out that this is not special protection, this is equal protection. And that's really the bottom line. That's what it's all about. We're asking that all of those 14 minority groups cited in our ordinance be given the same equal protection, and that no one be given anything special, no one be given anything that the rest of society doesn't already have. Thank you.
David?
Thank you. I'm here, I think, to make this a debate, because a debate, you have to have people on each side of an issue, and it may well turn out to be that if I were suddenly to leave, you wouldn't have a debate anymore. You might have a wonderful discussion, but it wouldn't be, at least academically, a debate. Now, I don't pretend to know any more about this subject than others, and in fact, I proclaim myself not as a specialist, but as a generalist. What little I know about it resulted from years of this issue being brought to Beacon Hill, and we were sort of on the other side of the hill from Mayor Bennett. He went through the dismantling, if you will, of the gay rights protection, which was in existence. In Massachusetts, we put it into the law. We didn't have it up until 1989. And for many, many years, there was legislation proposed. I can't tell you now how many years, but I can recall that it occupied substantial hours of debate in both the House and the Senate. And finally, in '89, the gay rights bill, or legislation as it was called, was finally passed by both branches and signed, of course, by the governor. And what that did is to add the single phrase, sexual orientation, to Chapter 151B of our statute. And that was a statute, just as Mayor Bennett has referred to, his being a broader statute, some 14 categories. Our statute included at that time race, color, religious creed, national origin, and sex. Maybe 5 areas, and we added to that sexual orientation. And then we said specifically that any discrimination based upon sexual orientation would be illegal in certain areas. One was in places of public accommodation. Another was in housing. Another was in employment, both public and private. And another was in the extension of credit, mortgaging, loans, bank transactions, and in real estate transactions generally. So those are the categories to which we specifically prohibited any discrimination based upon sexual orientation. I opposed the legislation, and whether I was right or wrong, I think it's fair that you know I did oppose the legislation, and I think that's what prompted my invitation here tonight. I did not feel that the evidence, and I'm talking now about the evidence presented to the legislature, I'm not talking about what it might have been in people's minds, but the evidence presented to the legislature just was not convincing that it was needed. In other words, if you look in the various areas, if you look in housing, I have never seen a lease form, I've never seen a offer form for a purchase or sale of real estate, a purchase and sale agreement. I've never seen any document connected with real estate, either for sale or for lease, that in any way even posed the question relative to sexual orientation. I have never seen any document in connection with financial transactions, receiving credit from a bank, borrowing money on a mortgage to buy real estate, or whatever the transaction might be. Never saw it. I don't think I've ever seen or heard of it in an employment application. So that there just wasn't evidence that we needed this law. And I note the summary of tonight's discussion is gay rights, civil rights, or special rights. And I would tell you that in my opinion, it is special rights. It is not civil rights. Now, the question I posed in the legislature through many years, and I tell you this because this sort of sets the stage for how the debate went. And I used to ask rhetorically the question, where are we heading? Where are we going? What is the goal? And the proponents of what was called the gay rights legislation publicly stated all they wanted was this one piece of legislation. And I used to say in the course of debate, what will come next? And the answer would be the same, nothing. This is it. Merely to give us in the statutes of the Commonwealth protection against discrimination in the categories outlined. Well, I knew that wasn't the case, because if you look at the agenda, and if somebody says whose agenda, I don't know whose agenda, but the agenda is there, and I am absolutely convinced of it. The next step, and I don't put these in necessarily the appropriate chronological order, the next step is the Domestic Partnership Act, and some cities or communities have already undertaken that. The next will be coverage under health insurance programs. And finally, and there may be some others along the way, but I think the ultimate goal is legalization of the homosexual marriage. Now, I say that to you without any judgmental opinion, whether that's good or bad. But I think to say that isn't the goal, we're kidding ourselves. And what always really bothered me, and I dealt with many of the proponents, I met with them in my office, I clearly debated on the floor of the legislature, and I did a great deal of other work on this. The question was, is that the agenda? And the answer was overwhelmingly, no, that is not the agenda. And yet it is the agenda, and you can see it unfolding almost on a daily basis. So I think that in dealing with this subject, it is important to know, where are we going? What is the ultimate goal? And if you recognize what the goal is, and if that's what you want, then obviously we should get on with it. If, on the other hand, that is not what you want, then it seems to me you at least ought to be aware that, in my judgment, that is the agenda of those who advocated in 1989 and for all the years leading up to that, the passage of the gay rights legislation. Thank you.
McFeely.
Thank you. First of all, just a little bit of a clarification. There were actually 4 important referenda that went before the voters in 1992, and Colorado is the one we're focusing on. All 4 were very different. They had some similarities, but they were all fairly different. Colorado was to amend the Constitution of the state, as was Oregon. In Oregon, the outcome was different, and the language was very different. The far right, which has been proposing these ordinances and these changes, the constitutional amendments, have learned from that lesson and are picking up from the Colorado experience and are filing similar kinds of legislation to invalidate city ordinances through state constitutional changes in several other states, and we're going to see that in probably 10 or 12 states in 1994. Tampa and Portland, Maine were the other two examples, and those were city ordinances or city referenda that went to repeal the act of the legislative body. In Tampa, it was actually Hillsborough County commissioners, and in Portland, Maine, the city council. Again, very different because in Tampa, the gay rights law, if you will, was repealed, and in Portland, Maine, it was upheld. Interesting fact about most of those votes, they almost all, and I may be off by a percentage or two, were won or lost at 53-47. I don't know what was magical about 53-47. But another observation about that is that I think for those of us who propose legislation that protects the rights of gays and lesbians, that we won't drop below 47. That's a minimum, and that we're going to be going up. I'm very happy to be reunited with David on this particular issue because I can remember very clearly in Boston, in David's first term as a chief sponsor of the ordinance that expanded the Massachusetts concept in Boston, actually covers more categories in 1984, in the first year that David was on the city council, and I was privileged to work on the drafting of that ordinance, so it's very nice to be here and talk about that. I want to just focus about the politics of this, not the rightness or wrongness, or you know where I stand on that. I think the politics are fascinating because I think actually the far right did a very good job. And I think that this is, we have to learn from that, whether we're on one side or the other, about what was happening. And particularly in framing this whole notion about special rights, I think that was very clever and very powerful and obviously worked in Colorado. I also don't feel that Colorado is hate-filled, and I don't think that the other 49 states are hate-free. In fact, I would submit, and if anyone can prove this differently, come forward, that the Colorado-type language would pass in Massachusetts, that the Colorado-type language would probably pass in every single state in the country, and that the reason I say that is because I think there's a certain smugness about people about Colorado, and in deference to our guest from Aspen, I think it's very important to point out that as I travel around the country and look at different results and different ways that the far right is organizing, not just in Colorado Springs, Colorado, but all over this country, that the Colorado type amendment would probably pass, so we're going to see a lot more of that. So why did the theme special rights work with the populace? I mean, what's the political appeal there? I think it's working off a theme that's been around since 1980, at least since Reagan, that people playing to a white middle-class audience that are very frustrated and very fearful around affirmative action and civil rights in general. A lot of people that they know or they imagine have been hurt by this. They see it in a different terms. I see the ad in the Harvey Gantt Jesse Helms race with a pink slip being crumpled by a white hand and blaming Senator Kennedy and potentially his close ally if Harvey Gantt had been elected, and that was the message: if you elect Harvey Gantt, Senator Kennedy will have another vote. So that's a theme that's been kicking around a lot, and that special rights, whether it's for lesbians and gay men or for whomever, is one that seems to resonate with people, and the polling shows that. I think another theme is that people are just generally unfamiliar with sexuality and want to stay that way. Not homosexuality, not hetero, they just don't want to talk about sexuality, so they like to talk about special rights whenever anything about sexuality is raised. The people in this country love the word equality, they love the word justice. The words around special rights or civil rights connote different things, and you can find that out by asking any pollsters in terms of asking almost the same question but using those words. The results will be very different. And the other, I think, amazing part about this campaign from a political perspective of the special rights campaign was that it made lesbians and gays the object. That was the focus of the debate. And frankly, our problem in Colorado was that we never joined that debate and said, yep, you're right, and here we are. Instead, I think the failure in Colorado, unlike Oregon, where they did do that, And they said, yes, there are gays and lesbians in Oregon, and we're hardworking, tax-paying citizens, and we're like everyone else. In Colorado, they shifted the debate into, it was a debate about home rule and whether Aspen should pass its ordinance or Denver should have home rule, and they tried to intellectualize it and dehumanize the whole idea. And I think that was a fatal flaw, and I think that the right wing hit the political nail on the head by making gays and lesbians the object, and the xenophobia and the general fear of people of the unknown, particularly the unknown around sexuality, an issue they don't want to talk about, came through. Interesting side note, just recently I read that this Colorado type amendment, constitutional amendment, is being introduced in Idaho. And I think they've collected all or nearly all the signatures. And the Attorney General of Idaho recently ruled that that in his opinion this was not a valid constitutional amendment, and they'll be appealing that through the courts. But I think he suggested the cure for this, and that is that how can there possibly, in his opinion, how could there possibly be special rights if everyone is covered? And in fact, these laws do cover everyone. You are covered, you are protected on the basis of your sexual orientation. Now, everyone has a sexual orientation. I mean, some are north, some are south, some are northeast by southwest, or whatever, but everyone has a sexual orientation. So heterosexuals are protected by these statutes. These are not statutes that protect only lesbians and gay men. These protect everyone. And for some heterosexuals who have tried to get a job in Provincetown, it may well be enforceable in Massachusetts. And I think that's an important thing, not just from sort of a glib sense, but I think also from a constitutional and legal sense. These laws are drafted to protect everyone. They are not special. They are drafted to protect everyone if you feel, and in fact the evidence shows, that you were discriminated against because you are a heterosexual, a homosexual, or a bisexual. The polling results that we show, that we get when we poll on these issues is amazing. Most Americans, between 65 and 70%, consistently think that it is illegal in this country to fire a person because she's a lesbian or he's a gay man. Most people in this country believe we are protected. I identify with that group. So I think it's important, not just because people believe that's true, but also because people think it should be true, that that's the normative projection of those people as well. Well, I just want to sum up by saying, I analyze this in political terms, and as the leader of a large lesbian and gay political organization, we have to combat it. We can't be in denial about this. It's going to happen. It's going to happen all over. It's going to cost us a tremendous amount of money. I think that we have to engage in this debate, and I'm sure I'm not giving away any ideas to our opponents here, but we have to shift the focus of our debate from the gays and lesbians only and shift it to the people who are proposing this. Who are these people who are proposing this? And start shifting that debate. Much as you would in a political debate, it's not just about John Silber. It's about John Silber and Bill Weld. I mean, you've got a choice there. We've got to make it a choice for people in terms of who's proposing this. It's not just about lesbians and gays. It's also about the radical religious right trying to control your lives. And they did that very well in Oregon. Secondly, we really have to train people in the states as to how to fight these kinds of initiatives, both from the signature collecting level right up straight through the legal challenge level, and certainly getting out the vote and identifying it. The religious right has done this very, very well, and we have not, and we've got to do this. We really have to do a better job at public persuasion on the whole issue of sexuality and not be afraid to say that this is about sexuality and talk about it very openly and very publicly. And my time is up. I think that finally, though, the major reason I was here was to talk about the final solution of this problem, which is to pass a national, federal gay and lesbian civil rights bill, and then we won't have all of these state and local bills. So that's what we're about. Thank you.
Councilor Skondres.
Thanks. I know most of this is supposed to be an opportunity for you to speak and talk, so I'll be brief. Besides which, I was only told 3 hours ago that Mary Bonato is sick as a dog, and would I replace her on the panel? You may have seen my crutches. It was not a gay bashing. I fell on the ice. My colleague, Senator Locke, is a gentleman and not a bad human being. And I want to tell you something. If he believed in his heart and really knew what was happening to some people, I believe he would have immediately, and would immediately, be the first person to say we got to do something about it. And why I'm saying that is, it is a fundamental axiom of our movement that most human beings, the vast majority of human beings, who get to know individual lesbians and gay men and bisexuals, and who see what happens to them, get upset and want to do something about it because we're human. If that is not true, quite frankly, all of our legal strategies and laws and the rest are going to be meaningless. If it is true, then we have a chance to create the first actually functioning pluralistic society that sees diversity as an asset rather than something threatening. We talk special, gay, or civil. The question was asked a long time ago, and it was answered in a way somewhat unique, from my point of view, by Martin Luther King, having the time to do so in jail in a letter to ministers, in which he attempted to talk about unjust laws, unjust situations, without appeal to God's specific value systems, particular principles. What he said is very simple, that when any group imposes conditions or takes actions on some other group that they would never allow themselves to be subjected to, then that is objectively unjust. That condition is unjust. It's quantifiable. It's empirical. The whole trouble with the special rights business, for me as a gay man, is frankly, I've been trying for so many years to stop having special rights. It isn't funny. The irony is that the lesbian and gay community doesn't want to be special anymore. Specifically, Andrea Gargiulo, when she was the chairperson of the licensing division of the City of Boston's licensing board in 1983, took a walk with her husband to what was then a gay bar called the 1270. The doorman wouldn't let her in because she was heterosexual. The next day we went up to, 60 State Street, nice restaurant at the top, and she told me how furious she was, the anger she had, the hostility, the outrage that the chairperson of a licensing board wouldn't be allowed in to a bar. And I said, Andrea, there's no law against discriminating against people because they're straight, because of their sexual orientation. What I was so fascinated with was how a very intelligent person could be so angry for so many months over one small incident that most people who are gay and lesbian go through so many times in their life, they assume it's the normal state of affairs. Let me close this way. It's not about special rights, it's about ending violence. And that's what other people need to understand. Staten Island, January 21, 2 people stab a gay man, rip open his chest, slash his throat. North Fort Myers, Florida, 2 men confessed to police that they murdered another man on September 13th because they hate gay people. Queens, New York, Latino gay man beaten to death with a hammer in a schoolyard. You know, it's going to take too many hours to go through these because there are thousands of them. I'd have you read them. They come from all across the country. An Aft Commission report, 1981, 88? 88, concluded that the most frequent victims of violence in this country are people who are perceived to be lesbians or gay men. Again, the most frequent victims of violence in this country. And those who are not disingenuous know full well that the most common words in the walls of the public places in this society are nigger and faggot. That we are teaching our children to hate two groups of people, and that unless we find a way to stop teaching our kids to hate each other, that this struggle is going to continue. And if we can't find a way to learn to really put an end to that hate through the laws and through more than that, coming out and meeting our friends, I do not believe this society will continue any more than Lincoln thought it could if the South split, any more than you and I believe that Eastern Europe can survive if it continues to behave the way it presently is vis-a-vis Bosnia, Serbia, and so forth. We're a unique place. We have hundreds of religions, tremendous numbers of nationalities and languages, different sorts of people. And if we don't learn to protect each of them from hatred and violence and being humiliated, then we're not going to have a society. We're going to have chaos. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, panel. We now have a half hour or so for questions and comments. We have microphones over here. I hope that some of you will choose to go to them. As you do, I would like to ask you to identify yourselves. Does any of the members of the panel have any comments they'd like to make while people are moving to the... Here we go. Yes.
I would just like to point out to Mr. Locke that...
Did you identify yourself?
Oh, excuse me. My name is David Smith, and I'm a graduate student in history here at Harvard. And I would just like to point out that prior to the Civil War, when the Republican Party was proposing the end of bans on... when the Republican Party was trying to restrict slavery in the territories, the Southern response was their agenda is to make intermarriage legal. And that was Stephen Douglas's argument against Douglas in the debates in Illinois. And I'd just like to point that out. Thank you.
Do you want to comment, Senator?
No, I don't.
Okay. Why don't we go to the other side first? Go ahead.
Jacqueline Fuller, I'm a Kennedy School student. I'm part of the radical religious right, but I don't hate homosexuals. And I have a scenario that I'd like to ask the panel how you would respond, how you think the policy was handled. There's a situation at the University of Michigan where a graduate student came and was assigned to a dorm, and his roommate started putting up pictures of naked men. So when the student's name is Jerome Pinn, and when Jerome confronted him about it, they had a talk, and his roommate said, yeah, I'm homosexual, and I plan to entertain my partners here, so, you know, you just have to get used to that. Jerome is Christian. He had religious views about homosexuality, and so he appealed to the housing authority to get a new roommate, and they denied him, and he appealed again. He was finally given the ability to have another roommate, and this is the part that I have problems with. He was forced to go to homophobic classes, and he was forbidden to speak on campus about his religious views on the matter. And I wrote down some phrases I heard tonight because I agree with them. I think they're good things. And one was that we need to decide when discrimination is going to be legally and morally permissible, and that it's dangerous when the state can, quote, endorse or support private bias or discrimination. As a Christian, I feel my fear is not that there be equal rights for homosexuals, but that we get to the point where I think society is headed where you're not allowed to have a religious view that homosexuality is not morally acceptable. How would you, maybe on the panel, how would you respond in the Michigan situation? Do you feel that what the school did was permissible and in the spirit of toleration? And if not, how would you handle it differently?
Could
Well,
well,
my response, I don't know what the, what the precedents were. If you just take the same situation and two male roommates were living together and one was putting up pictures of naked women and declared to the other roommate that, he even planned to entertain his opposite sex female friends, if the result was the same, and maybe it well should be that the person who found that offensive as a Christian who believed in fidelity and no sex outside marriage had an alternative not to have to expose him or herself to that situation. If that were equally applied, then I think that would be the right thing. I think all too often what would happen, however, is that the homophobia would override and people would condone the heterosexual model. And I think that is something, as a gay man, I can say is something that we're confronted with all the time. And I'm not saying that, that's necessarily, that administrators in colleges and universities shouldn't be more sensitive to this issue. But I think it should be equally applied.
That's not the part that troubled me. The part was...
Why don't we let the other members for the
Well,
moment comment?
the part I'm asking the panel to respond to, I'm not concerned about that part. I'm concerned about the being coerced, forced to go to, quote, anti-homophobic classes and being forbidden from speaking about religious views on campus.
let me speak directly about that. When we wrote in Boston the human rights law, I specifically exempted all religious organizations because I felt that there was a need to make sure that folks have a right to the sanctity of their religious beliefs. When the group of folks called Hare Krishnas were denied a permit, who are incidentally very homophobic, on Boston Common by the Boston city government, I was the one that got them their permit, and we've had discussions ever since about homophobia. What I'm concerned about, and I don't know the answer to, and I'd like you to think about it, at what point is the freedom to say whatever you want and do whatever you want dangerous to someone else? If we started teaching children in public schools that it was all right to kill Christians, as some places did once, in fact, or taught them to degrade and humiliate Christians, would that be okay? Should we protect that? I'm asking it really as an honest, open question. At what point do we start to ask many of the Christian churches, is what they're teaching children causing those children later to hate themselves and commit acts of violence against others? On the sexual mores issues, the Amish and many others have shown me that people that have any kind of decency learn how to structure situations to respect each other's differences. There are non-alcohol dormitories at BU. I think that's wonderful. There are places that we ought to create for people who have special beliefs and special needs. It's when we start kind of forcing other people to conform to our view that I start getting concerned. In the case of gay people, however, if you look at the data and you look at the numbers, 37% alcoholism, the suicide rate among teenagers, the nonverbal and verbal messages, you conclude over and over again that we've got a serious problem here, that people are being taught to hate people like me, and that's got to stop. But I'm not sure how we do it. I just, feel that way. Is that fair?
Anyone else? Yes.
My name is Justin Ladis, and I'm co-chair of the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual Caucus here at the Kennedy School. I have a question for Tim McFeely. You talked about 10 Colorado-like anti-gay rights initiatives across the country in different states. Last week, Minnesota passed a pro-gay rights initiative. Could you give, from your perspective as head of a national gay and lesbian organization, what the 90s looked like for gay rights? Are all rights that we have now are going to be overturned in states, and then they'll be reestablished? Where does Clinton fit in? Will there be a national gay rights law anytime soon?
I think there could be a national gay rights law very soon. I'll pick up on that. And I think, though, that we're going to have a long debate about this simply by the nature of the fact that most Americans are very ignorant about sexuality and how it comes about. I think it's going to be fairly protracted. I think we will see some states follow the suit of Minnesota and the other 7. There are now 8 states that protect people in employment. But I also think that we're going to see a lot of the Colorado type initiatives trying to repeal those, as we will as close to Massachusetts as Maine. I think Maine will be having that in '94. So it'll be a coastal, a coast-to-coast kind of battle. I think it'll be up and down. I think Bill Clinton fits in because he's the first president in 12 years that's even said the word lesbian and gay in the context in which I mean it. He's come fairly foursquare, but he wasn't alone. I mean, all the Democratic nominees were with him. I think, Paul Tsongas actually introduced the federal bill in the Senate in 1981, and has been a leader in that. So I think it's going to be tumultuous. I think it's going to be very similar in terms of engaging the religious right as the abortion issue has been.
Hello, my name is David Roseborough. I'm a student at the Divinity School. And Senator Locke, I wanted to ask in all sincerity, you mentioned some of your activism taking place in Beacon Hill about housing rights and such. And I wonder if your sense that that's not an issue maybe comes from some very real discrimination that takes place in Beacon Hill. I'm thinking along racial lines too. I wonder how many African American families live in Beacon Hill, how many Latina couples, and if maybe the sense that it's not an issue comes from its own homogeneity, rather. I went to a very homogeneous white Lutheran liberal arts undergraduate school, and when I tried to form a gay and lesbian student group, my status as a student was threatened. There was nothing I could appeal to within the protection clauses of my university to ensure my safety. When I was faced with death threats, I met a very unsupportive administration. So I just want to point that out. And also studying religion, I understand the separation of religion and state, but that I am not allowed ordination. As a graduate coming out of Harvard Divinity School, I will not be able to be ordained in most major denominations in America. And so I feel like I want to point that out to you to give you an exposure of some diversity.
Good evening. My name is Sharon Matthews. I'm a mid-career student here at the Kennedy School, one of only 2 African American women this particular year in the mid-career program. The reason I'm at the mic is because, and I was sitting pondering this, when, and I'm against all isms and homophobia, all of that, but I am bothered when homophobia is equated with racism. And I got the same feeling when we were talking about the ERA years ago too, because what has happened, and this is what the African American community is faced with aside from its own being homophobic, is that once these rights and the doors are opened, those who are of like mind in terms of being for human rights, but are of a different hue, leave us. They go through the doors and leave us. And I think that's another issue in terms of the gay community, in terms of its leadership, which is predominantly Caucasian male. The isms there within that group in terms of leadership, and also within the lesbian community that's in terms of its leadership too, in terms of Caucasian women, the isms of racism there, and also with the gay white males leadership, sexism too. Now, those issues, until those are also dealt with internally, it's going to be extremely hard to get a cross-section of African Americans to support on a national basis this movement until those issues are addressed, in addition to homophobia. And I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Is the challenge primarily to the idea of equivalence between the sexual preference issue and the race issue?
Yes, because no one can tell, for instance, unless these 2 gentlemen had said, publicly what their sexual orientation actually is. And because of the society we're living in now, they have certain privileges that their hue brings, perhaps not their orientation, but their hue. And also not their views, but hue in this country right now counts for everything, in addition to being male. And until those realities also are dealt with, a coalition, which is what you need in order to get this type of thing dealt with legislatively, is going to be extremely hard to deal with. And I don't hear those kinds of conversations going on within the communities that we're talking about. So if we are talking about a successful coalition being mounted and these issues being dealt with, then we need to also include these conversations and not to equate the two, because they are very, very different.
I hear two issues. One is the issue of the political coalition building effort, which is a political challenge, would be interesting to hear some discussion of. The other is the equivalence issue on the merits, aside from the political coalition issue, which of course is at the center of the debate about gays in the military at the moment, which we haven't heard anything about during the course of the evening. And it would be very interesting to hear members of the panel address really both of these issues, which are extraordinarily interesting. Yes, David?
With the political coalition piece is something I know a lot about. It turns out in practice in 1984, it was the black members of the Boston City Council who were instrumental in making it possible for us to have a civil rights law for lesbians and gay men. It was Bruce Bowling who stuck up for the foster care issue very strongly, both in communities of color and in the white heterosexual community. It was, that's on one piece. Piece number two, Ken Reeves is mayor of Cambridge, a black man, as you know, is openly gay. The city councilor in Albany, Vincent Keith St. John, is a gay man, person of color. Don't like to look at equating the different oppressions, because my experience of them is that they're all different and they're all horrible. I believe that God is listened to because she is not because she's magnanimous, but because she's powerful. And that the only power we will be able to get, if we do get enough power, it will be because we don't desert each other across color lines, issues, all the isms. One thing to observe, the lesbian and gay community is unique among all communities in this society, in that unlike any other one, it has Jews, old and young, male and female, black and white, Hispanic, every religious group. It cannot have unity and power unless it deals with racism, anti-Semitism, and so forth. So ironically, and statistically, and we can talk about that some other time, those groups that I mentioned, Jewish community groups, communities of color, have statistically been the most supportive of the lesbian and gay movement. I witnessed the fact that very few people understood why Jesse Jackson did so well in Northampton and Western Massachusetts, because it's all white, quote unquote. But they didn't understand the size of the lesbian and gay community in the Connecticut River Valley.
It's interesting, if I may, you've cited several people of color, particularly African Americans, who have been advocates for this movement, but I cannot cite readily the same in terms of who has been advocating from the leadership of this particular community for the African American community in areas when it really, was necessary.
I hear the feeling. I'd like you to know I went to jail with Mel King over the Krugerrand. We were in the wagon together, and he laughed because he said in the dark there was no light in the police wagon. We can't tell who's black, and I said, and because we're hugging each other, because you see, there's no way to stop from falling unless you do. And he says, and you can't tell who's straight either.
Yeah. But the key is that we all must hug.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Sorry.
Well, I think you put your finger on something that's very important, and one observation I want to make about that is that that for gay people, for all of us, coming out is a lifelong process, and going back into the closet, something that I call the situational closet, occurs on a daily basis, and it's something that women and people of color cannot do. And it does make a qualitative difference, I think, in terms of the commitment and in terms of the privilege or lack of privilege, depending on which side of the equation you're on. In terms of the, and I think people have to feel that. I mean, I think people have to really feel the difference that gays and lesbians have, perhaps more similar, let's say, to persecuted groups like Jews, who might pass and go into the situational closet, let's say, in order to protect, which women or people of color cannot do. In terms of coalition, though, I just want to make a point that I'm very, very proud of the fact that the Leadership Coalition, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, has endorsed the Gay and Lesbian Civil Rights Bill and the military, lifting the military ban. And with that kind of alliance, the Leadership Conference being the principal civil rights umbrella group in Washington, we feel very confident of victory. And without their support, it would be very, very difficult and I'd say well nigh impossible. So we're very grateful for that.
Say anything?
Let me just say a word, Alan, because I haven't responded to any of the comments, and several things have been said, and I speak now only so that silence won't in any way be construed as some recognition of the truth of what's been said. Tim said in his earlier statement that nobody wants to talk about sexuality. I would suggest to him that's all we talk about. It's everywhere you go. You read in the Boston Globe this morning, a question posed rhetorically and pictures of the people answering, would you let your spouse sleep with someone else for $1 million and you could retire for the rest of your life? You watch Oprah Winfrey, you watch almost all of these talk shows, and people bear the most intimate. I'm embarrassed. I've been around a while, but I'm embarrassed at the things that are said. I cannot believe that people go in a public forum and disclose the intimacy that they do. So when Tim says nobody wants to talk about sexuality, I don't know where you've been, Tim. That's all I hear about. And I would suggest maybe the answer is let's low-key it. Let's not talk so much about sexuality. It's with us, it always has been, and I guess it probably always will. But we don't have to make it our daily diet, morning, noon, and night. Now, secondly, I want it understood that I do not favor discrimination of any kind for any reason against anybody. And the very attractive young lady who spoke about the situation in... You're very handsome yourself. I know I've been corrected so many times I can't use that phrase any longer, although I must tell you it's been with me most of my life. So don't construe or conclude that those who support the gay rights legislation are all discriminatory. It isn't true. Now, my very dear friend, Councilor Skondres, said that, and referred to the radical religious right. I want you to understand from my perspective, I do not belong to the radical religious right. I reject their position about as completely as I can any position. So I just don't want anybody to say, Locke voted against the bill, he sat there while others commented about discrimination and the radical religious right, and he didn't say anything, therefore the shoe must fit. It does not fit. And I just want the record to be clear on that. And Dave will tell you, he came to me one time with an issue in which he was very deeply concerned and asked if I would support it. And I listened to him. We met in my office. I thought he was absolutely right. And I went to the floor of the Senate and I supported him. And he then presented me with a very nice little citation from the Boston City Council. And Dave, it occupied the most prominent position on my wall in my office. It's one of the things I was proudest of. So I will listen to the suggestions of everybody, and if I think it makes sense, I'll support it. If I think it does not, I will not.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Ajay Zichi. I'm a senior at Harvard College, and I have a statement and a question. The statement is, I'm graduating, I'm heading out in the real world, and quite frankly, I want to work wherever I want to work and not have to worry about losing my job because of my sexuality. Behaviors and sexuality aren't equated, and I think that's a problem that gays, lesbians, and bisexuals face in the workplace. The question is for Senator Locke, and you spoke of the slippery slope towards domestic partnership and homosexual marriage. And I would ask you, what is so wrong about two men or women who would want to spend the rest of their lives together bound in a legal contract?
Excellent question. I didn't say there was anything wrong about it. All I said was, and I said it in debate through the years, that is the goal. Now, I don't say that's wrong. It may be right, it may be wrong. But for heaven's sakes, for those who advocate this, don't say that isn't the goal. Don't say you want just two words inserted in the general laws of Massachusetts. You want to add the phrase sexual orientation to Chapter 151B, and once that's accomplished, everybody goes away in the happiest clams. That isn't the case. Now, interestingly enough, and it was not mentioned, when this legislation went through, and if you read the law today, there are some very interesting exclusions, if you will. Sexual orientation is specifically designed or defined in the statute not to include any sexual orientation where a child is the object of one's affections. So that's an exception. There is language in the statute that says sexual orientation can be a factor when we get into the area of adoption of minor children. In other words, it will not be discrimination to rule out an adoption if it is construed to be in the best interest of the child. There's an exception. And then there is further language that nothing in this act, it's this broad, nothing in this act shall be construed to legitimatize the homosexual marriage. And I tell you these things because in 1989, when this was debated, and it had been debated over many years, but this was a culmination, this is when it was finally passed in both branches, there was still enough concern on the part of everybody, pro and con, or at least a majority, so that those specific references were inserted in the statute. And I predict for you that as the days unfold ahead, that probably there will be steps taken, pieces of legislation, that will eliminate those present references. And again, I'm not suggesting that's good or bad. All I'm telling you is that as a legislator, I felt it was my duty with this bill and every other bill to know, or at least to try and determine, where is it we're going, rather than just to say, this is it, pass this, you'll never see me again.
All right, I'm going to, just a second, Mayor Bennett. I'm going to ask everybody from here on in to be as brief as possible because I want to get through those who are online at the moment and also finish up within the next 10 or 15 minutes. But Mayor Bennett?
Just a quick additional comment on your question. I'd like to address that from a Colorado perspective as we're going through a lot of this right now. And I think it is fair in Colorado to refer to them as the religious right, and I'm not including you in that group, but there was a group in Colorado, there is a group in Colorado that is religious by persuasion that was rather strongly pushing Amendment 2. They trotted out they used a lot of scare tactics about quotas and special protected status and a lot of things that they kind of fanned the flames of fear and mistrust with. The fact is there was no basis to any of that. There was no political movement whatsoever, certainly in our town, in Denver, and Boulder, and we're the three that had civil rights legislation already, to create any of those things. And it was really imaginary in that case. I'm not saying that it may not exist in others, but in our state it was certainly created for the campaign. Second comment I've got is you used the term slippery slope. And David, earlier you talked on the same subject about what will come next. And I'd just like to sort of turn that around for a moment. The slippery slope that we in Colorado fighting Amendment 2 are most worried about is that which you start down when you say this one group it's okay to discriminate against. Because once you say it's all right, you can't discriminate against Afro-Americans or Jews or the beleaguered minority Republicans even, but you can discriminate against gays or lesbians. What stops you? I mean, why do you not take it one step further and one step further? I mean, you're opening a very dangerous door and starting down a very dangerous slope.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Rob Quinnen. I'm an attorney in private practice here in Boston. And I'd like to ask Senator Locke whether you could envision any circumstances under which you as a legislator would support legislation that would directly benefit the gay and lesbian community. For example, would you support hate crimes legislation that increased the penalty for crimes committed as a result of a bias against gay people? Or would you support legislation that was designed to decrease the incidence of suicides among gay and lesbian teenagers? And if so, where do you draw the line between legislation that's good and beneficial and legislation that goes too far?
Well, the answer, if I can give you one word, the answer is yes. And the record is clear. I've done it. I have supported the very things that you have posed the question on. And I would continue if I had not taken early retirement, not entirely by choice. The answer is yes. And I think we should look at, and I tried when I was there to study each piece of legislation and not to prepackage it that it's gay, it's lesbian, it's right, it's left, it's liberal, it's conservative. What does it do? So in direct response to your question is I would and I did. And I would continue to if I had the opportunity. One thing I might mention, because the radical religious right is on one side, and I claim not to have any part of that, and I would tell those who support the gay rights movement, if we can call it that there are those among you who hurt your cause. And I recall so well, as an example, at an ordination ceremony of new young priests being ordained in the Catholic religion at the cathedral in Boston, members of a militant group saw fit to stand outside during this kind of a ceremony and throw condoms at the soon-to-be ordained priest. Now, that kind of action, whether you're for or against gay rights, it seems to me you have to oppose that kind of action. And I would only tell you, and I tell you this sort of as a helpful hint, that hurts the cause tremendously. And that's what fuels the fire of discontent among people. This is what fans the flames of fear about the unknown. And so those who are seriously interested in advancing the cause of gay rights, and I'm sure that if not everybody here, certainly probably the vast majority feels that way, you do not help your cause when you engage in that kind of conduct. Now, on the question of gay bashing, on the question of anything of that sort, hate crimes, I would support those as strongly as I could, and if you want to check the record, you'll find that I did do that.
My name is Jim Pinney. I'm an alum of Harvard, graduated 25 years ago, and I would like to say how opposed I am to the whole vocabulary of an affirmative action and the whole deal. It's repugnant. Now, I came in late, so I didn't hear the general discussion, but what I have heard so far is not a principled discussion about why one should in general oppose or support special discrimination. It's about this interest group, gays, or this other interest group, blacks, supporting one another and helping one another out. There's no general discussion of whether it's a good idea to even have such a thing. I would advocate people reading Harvey Mansfield's book. I'm sure he's a name you know. America's Constitutional Soul. Is on the faculty. It's an exquisite statement against affirmative action. Just a lovely one. And I would offer as a question, oh yes, that people can be opposed to it, believe me. As evidence, I don't want to go through the argument, but I would like to offer a piece of evidence.
Let me interrupt you if I may, because
yes.
Actually we haven't had any discussion of affirmative action this evening. And the question might be as to whether anybody on the panel does advocate affirmative action for gays, but nobody has yet advocated that.
Okay, I'm sorry. Because I would like to, the thing that surrounds affirmative action to me is one of the things is linguistic oatmeal, linguistic mush. And I'll give you an example, people of color.
But sir, there is a problem, and that is, so far nobody has,
okay, I'll give you another example.
That's not been a subject this evening.
Homophobic. Let's talk about that word. What does that word mean? A phobia is an irrational fear, by definition. It's an insanity. It's a form of craziness. So if a person is accused of being homophobic because they don't like homosexuals, because they're opposed to homosexuality on moral grounds, if that's the word that's used automatically, homophobic, and then they're sent to a class about it, they are deemed to not have a rational argument. They are deemed to be sick because they have that view. It is actually possible to have a view against homosexuality and not be mentally ill. It's possible to do that. And for a university to advocate the idea, or for the word to be used as if it was a normal description, like two-legged, is already to foreclose the debate about the general principles of these things. You see this linguistic mush all around. When your comment, you're on the right there, when you said, well, we have to look at whether speech harms people. That's not true. Free speech, the question is, all right, I'm sorry, you're right. I stood up to make a speech. I actually don't have a question to ask.
All right.
I apologize.
Thank you. Thank you. Do any members of the panel care to comment? All right, yes, sir.
Well, that's a tough act to follow. But my name is Terry Macco, and I am with a telecommunications firm here in Boston that has recently joined forces with a gay marketing firm to launch a brand of long-distance service in the gay community called Community Spirit, which is an affinity service that donates back to the community. I bring that up because the rationale behind it is to demonstrate the economic power and clout of the gay market. Mm-hmm. And with the gay market, part of gaining rights, part and parcel of that is demonstrating one's economic clout. It seems that the two sometimes go hand in hand, that until one can prove the economic clout behind a group or a minority, that the causes for rights aren't really furthered along. And I'm wondering if Mr. McFeely and Mr. Bennett might comment on how the economic clout of the gay market is tying into the boycott of Colorado right now. I'm guessing that you two might have very opposing viewpoints on, or perhaps not, I don't know, of the rationale and the strategy behind the boycott and the importance of the economic clout of the gay community in furthering gay rights issues.
Well, my organization and I personally endorse the boycott of Colorado, principally as a prophylactic measure, because we believe that this is going to spread to other states, and it's important for the gay community to heighten its awareness of this issue. And I think it did. I mean, I think it kept the story alive in the press. It kept the gay and lesbian community mobilized, and it does add economic clout. There is one problem about the economic issue that is not directly responsive to your question, then I'll pass to Mr. Bennett. I think that there is a general misimpression of this in this country that gay people are better off than the norm. That is not true, and I think proposing that or putting forth that argument hurts us a great deal in our rights, in getting civil rights. Because generally in these debates, I face people who oppose civil rights for lesbians and gays, who put forward the argument that we are economically privileged. I think the more visible, perhaps, gay and lesbian community may be, and has the economic security to do that. But I constantly have to remind people that that is not true generally, that lesbians in particular and gay men as well do not fit the profile of Hollywood and Manhattan and the rest. And so I think we have to be very careful about that economic power of the gay community stuff.
I want to start by saying that, Tim, I agree with you on the prophylactic theory. This came up at a lunch earlier today here at the Kennedy School, and I said then, and I'll repeat now, that I think the effect of the boycott, I think it'll have a far more positive effect in the rest of the nation than it will in Colorado. I really, for just the reasons you described. On the Colorado side of the coin, of the equation, I don't think it's having the desired effect. I think it's, if anything, kind of angering a lot of people, including our own gay community in Aspen, who are very pissed off about it, to put it simply. And the straight community feels pretty much the same way. The boycott of Arizona over Martin Luther King Day is a great example. I heard a very interesting story about 2 months ago on National Public Radio about that and how it worked and what the outcome was. And I wasn't sure if I believed the story or not, so I actually took the trouble to find one of the leaders of the movement that successfully got Martin Luther King Day recognized in a vote of the people of Arizona. And I called him on the phone. I had a really interesting conversation with him, and he essentially verified everything I'd heard on NPR. What he said was that the campaign to recognize Martin Luther King Day lasted 4 or 5 years in Arizona. For the first 2 or 3 years, they fought it the wrong way, and they failed totally. And the way they fought it was, gosh, Arizona, we're being boycotted, we're losing all this money, we've got to come to our senses and cave in and accept Martin Luther King Day and get on with our lives. This is too expensive. And the people resisted that totally. I mean, they got absolutely nowhere politically with that argument. In the final campaign in year 4 and 5, the campaign that finally succeeded, they totally switched tactics. They made no mention whatsoever of the economic aspects of the boycott or the boycott itself. They dwelled entirely on what he called the high road, the ethical road, the morals and philosophy of the question, what is right? As I think his words were, this is the right thing and this is the right time and we have got to do what is ethically and morally right. We're a better state than that. And it was that argument, it was the moral and ethical argument that finally won the day and succeeded in having Martin Luther King Day recognized. He's also, okay. One real quick thing. He is now very proud of the fact that Arizona is the only state in the Union that has actually ratified Martin Luther King Day by a vote of all the people of the state. I mean, the outcome, he thinks, was extremely positive. It has more of an appreciation of its own diversity than a lot of other states do or than it did before it went through this.
All right. 2 of you have been waiting for quite a while. I'd like to have these be the last 2 questions. Yes, sir.
My name is Bill Percy, and I'd like to ask the panel, including the presiding officer, if they would support groups, say like the Harvard Law School students, that it would be desirable to have an out gay tenured faculty member at the law school or the Kennedy School or here or there, and whether, if none are appointed or come out, we might consider outing people who are in very celebrities in high positions as a political weapon.
Anybody care to answer that question?
That's already being talked about in the Congress right now. So that's a movement that is not new by any means. Whether it will come about, I don't know. I do not basically favor what I would almost call the artificial action of insisting that you have a openly gay professor at the Harvard Law School. You can have 50 of them, doesn't bother me in the least. But to say that you're now going out and hire a professor purely and simply because he's openly gay or she is openly a lesbian, I think that's improper here at the Kennedy School, the law school, or any other school. I think that it's much better that we not put the spotlight, and I think, frankly, this is what is causing the division in society, the fact that we are putting such a intense spotlight on the issue. And it goes right back to the question, do we talk about sexuality? Tim says no. I say we talk about very little else, and I think we do well to talk a lot less about it.
Well, I think we talk a lot about sex. I don't think we talk a lot about sexuality. I think they're very different things. And the fact that a lot of people don't understand what sexuality even is and give sex examples instead it proves the point. I don't believe in outing, and I don't believe that people should be put in positions simply because they are heterosexual or homosexual. I want to focus my attention and the attention of my organization, and hopefully the attention of millions of gay and lesbian Americans, as well as straight, fair-minded people all over the world, on improving the environment so that people can come out. I think that there are gay and lesbian people on the Supreme Court, on the Supreme Courts of the states, in the Congress, far more than the two from Massachusetts, probably on the law school faculty, from the faculty here. And I think rather than talk about outing them or replacing them with out lesbians or out gay men, we ought to look at the circumstances that make them feel like they cannot come out. And it's a devastating kind of thing. I mean, I think that that's where the attention has to be put, rather than on sort of addressing the exterior problem in that way, the sort of superficial way, but try to change the environment. It's sort of like, the analogy that I have used is it's sort of like the butterfly coming out of the cocoon. And if you open the cocoon too early, that's still a caterpillar. It ain't a butterfly. Now, gay people are not all saints, and
But I do think that perhaps the greatest distinction between the gay rights movement and the civil rights movement more generally is that there really are not prominent calls for affirmative action with respect to gays, as opposed to other historically discriminated against minorities. And I think that's the case. If anyone thinks that's mistaken, I'd be interested in hearing about it, but that's what I've been hearing.
The whole point is that gay people and lesbians suffer tremendous psychological damage as a result of being unable to be openly who they are in their workplace. As a consequence, if we put a psychological and legal structure in place where people feel comfortable being who they are in an open manner, what you'll find is there's no need for affirmative action. Tim was absolutely right. There is a code of silence, and not to break it, but just to tell you, there is no institution that I have ever dealt with, including the U.S. Senate and Congress of the United States, that doesn't have plenty of lesbians and gay men and bisexuals. The issue is making the environment sufficiently comfortable. So in some funny way, perhaps our oppression is unique in that it doesn't need the solution of affirmative action. What it really needs is the end of psychological violence.
Final question.
Hi, I actually have 3 quick things that I'd like to address.
One question, please? This is our last
How
question.
about 2? I'll compromise there. One is...
This is a political school. We always compromise, yes.
My name is Tracy Whitley. I'm a Harvard Radcliffe graduate and currently an employee of Harvard Divinity School. I live in Boston. The 2 questions, one is directed to Senator Locke. And I guess what I just actually wanted to say to you was the comment that you made about the other woman who got up. I grew up in the South, and I can understand a level at which people try to compliment other people by commenting on their physical appearance. But it's exceptionally difficult as a woman to be approached or commented on by how you look or the fact that you are a woman as opposed to what you have to say. And that's something a great many women battle against all their lives. And so I just wanted to say that to you, not just so you would maybe understand more where I guess criticism would come from. It's not to put you down, it's just to say, instead, could you say that maybe she was articulate as opposed to attractive? But certainly can understand your background and perhaps being a bit old-fashioned. I have a father that way. I guess the other thing I wanted to say was to Tim McFeely. I just started working for you, and I was hoping maybe you could address the issue because a lot of my issues are concerned with issues of women and articulating and balancing our society, whatever hue we may be, as this woman pointed out.
One thing that I've found very interesting in the debate over gays and lesbians in the military is the feminizing of gays and the put down, therefore, that comes with it in terms of, Ellen Goodman wrote this wonderful article that said, you know, finally these heterosexual men who have been objectifying women for all these years are now terrified that they're going to be objectified in the showers by gay men. And I really think that something that maybe gays and lesbians have gotten way over a long time ago was even enjoying being objectified for whatever reason. And I just thought maybe you might have some comments regarding that issue.
Brief comments.
Briefly, I'm glad you're wearing your Operation Lift Man dog tags. I want to say that, yeah, I think for those of us who think about homophobia and discrimination against gay and lesbian people, I see it, and I think most of us see it, as a subset and a part of sexism, which is pervasive in this society. I mean, it is incomprehensible to me that if we did not have sexism, that we would still have discrimination against homosexuals. I just think that's absolutely basic. On the military issue, I just want to let you in on something that is really very, very important and obviously not well known. We have gone to very high-ranking generals and admirals on a very confidential basis. Your name will never be used. I will never, you know, repeat what you say. Tell us, what is the problem? Surely it is not gay men in the showers. What is the problem? Seriously. The problem is women. The problem is, as the force is reduced, the straight men want to keep their jobs. They see that relaxing the ban on gays and lesbians mostly benefits lesbians. And for a lot of poor women, this is the only way for them to get out of a traditional role and to get a skill. They don't have college as an alternative. And relaxing the ban may mean that more lesbians stay in the service and advance up the ladder, and it may mean that more are recruited or join the service. And what it's about is who gets the jobs, in what proportions, and the men are fearful that women, and specifically lesbians, will get their jobs. And that's what this debate is about.
I'm going to give David Locke the last
Let me just say this to the very articulate questioner. She understands.
Thank you. Thank you. I've worked 26 years for that. Thanks.
She understands me because she
Who says an old dog can't learn new tricks?
She understands me because she has a father as old-fashioned as I have. Let me tell her, the articulate questioner, I have two daughters almost identical to you. They caution me on a daily basis, and tonight has been an enormous success for me because I only slipped one time. Usually it's far more often. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We may not have had quite the full range of national debate on these issues here tonight, but we had a particularly articulate panel, and I'm really very grateful to you all. Great pleasure. Pleasure to see you. Hi. Pleasure to meet you.
You sort of my question. You said that no significant pressure for it. Do you just work on politics?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It came across loud and clear. Do you have any out gays tenured in the Kennedy School?
Not that I know about. Not that I know. No, right. Not